Hello and welcome to Game Changer Live. We're live every Wednesday at 3:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. We go live because that means no edits, and what you see is what you get. It's authenticity. It's my own trick for avoiding perfectionism, a trap. I don't need to be perfect. I just need to shine authentically. And our motto for this channel is Together We Inspire. So let's get inspired around topics of coaching and positivity and mindset and more. My name is Daniel Connor. I'm a certified professional coach. I'm an energy leadership index master practitioner, and I am a local leader for my local chapter of the International Coaching Federation. I'm a business owner. I'm the owner of Connor's Coaching, the sponsor of this channel, and my clients hire me because they are ready. They're ready to do the work to define and create a more fulfilling and prosperous life. Our goal is really simple. It's that every day we wake up to a slightly better version of ourselves in the mirror. And today we're going to be talking about something that prevents that. We're going to be talking about fear. Fear, in my opinion, having worked with a lot of different clients, fear is the number one thing that holds us back and prevents us from being the person that we were meant to be. And the trainer in me, I was a trainer for 15 years. The trainer in me wants to take four-letter words and turn them into acronyms all the time. So if that's going to be helpful for you, it does help me remember that fear really is a reaction to a future state that hasn't happened yet. So the acronym that I came up with is Future, Expectation, and Anxiety Reaction. FEAR, Future, Expectation, and Anxiety Reaction. We're afraid of something that hasn't happened yet. It's not likely to even happen, and yet we're convinced that we have to take action to prevent this outcome. And I'm going to say that this is going to be a short episode today, because this is a big topic. I'm not going to be able to cover it infinitely. But suffice it to say that not all fear is bad, that there are things in life that we should be afraid of and we should act based on fear. But if the fear is causing us stress and turmoil because it's taking us away from who we want to be, it is taking us away from who we want to live consistently as, then that fear then becomes a problem. It becomes a source of poor decision making. It becomes a source of us causing stress and trauma for ourselves. And I want to just go back to my favorite philosophy quote, which is from Lao Tzu. And it's really the second half of the second third of the quote that I want to focus on. But the full quote is, "You're depressed if you live in the past. You're anxious if you live in the future. And if you live in the present, you're at peace." It's the middle half of that. You're anxious if you're living in the future. Fear is a type of anxiety. Fear is something that we want to prevent from happening that hasn't happened yet. If a predator is stalking us, we have fear that predator is going to hunt us down. But that fear is not capable of full rational thought. By its very nature, the way that fear works is that it shuts down the higher functioning parts of our brain in the front center of our brain. We all have a negativity bias. We are predisposed. We are hardwired at our very core to presume the worst possible scenario, the worst possible outcome. It is part of the predator-prey response that we've never really quite evolved out of. And this negativity is incapable of telling positive stories. It's incapable of rational thought. In fact, when it is triggered, this part of our brain actually is responsible for taking energy and resources away from the parts of our brain that are capable of rational thought, rational judgment, right or wrong behavior, morality, ethics, and positive storytelling and empathy. We shut down and we become our base selves. And ironically, there have been study after study after study that show that there is a large percentage of our population that is predisposed to a significantly higher level of fear. From 2008 studies to 2012 studies to 2017 studies in London, they've shown that there are people in our society who are more disposed to the impact of negative thought, the hypervigilance behavior, the worry about significant events, and the trauma of experiencing news broadcasts and having those influence our thoughts and behaviors. It is no wonder that salespeople and news agencies have learned that the best way to get us to react to them, to follow them, and to listen to them is through provoking our fear responses. I even had fear response multiple times today just preparing for this episode, worrying about what people were going to think, whether or not I was being too political, whether or not people would pay attention to me or like what I had to say. And none of those things were reasonable worries or fears to react based off of. I am still here. I am still presenting, despite having a migraine, despite not feeling great today, not being at my best, despite these worries. Acting bravely, the antithesis of fear-based behavior, acting bravely, is not an absence of fear. It's not fearlessness. It is having the fear and doing a behavior that is consistent with who you want to be anyway, despite of it. So how do we overcome this very common human experience that we're predisposed to, that some of us are extra predisposed to? Should we even try? What's the point? Well, the truth is, when we're very conscious of the world, fear tends to be replaced with rationality, with empathy, and with other functions of the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex part of our brain is designed to make decisions and help us engage in life the way that we were meant to be, the way that we want to be. That is one of the things that sets us as a species apart from the rest of the universe. We have a prefrontal cortex and most animals don't, not to the degree that we do. We experience empathy, we experience relativity, we experience relationships, and those things cannot exist in the face of fear. The prefrontal cortex is the part of our brain that tells the positive stories, that tells the relational stories, that presumes positive intent, that analyzes possible outcomes, even the ones we fear, but we're going to behave that way anyway. The bravely moving forward in a way consistent with who we want to be, who we want to see ourselves as, that is the prefrontal cortex in action. The best way to fight fear is awareness. So we're going to talk about some of the common tropes of fear that I've seen as a coach. And we're not talking about fear as a trauma response right now. Fear as a trauma response is entirely different. Trauma itself needs to be healed through a mental wellness process that most coaches are not qualified for. Some of us are, some of us have licensed psychology or licensed sociology degrees, and we are capable of doing that. I'm not one of them, but not every form of fear is a form of trauma that needs that level of care. So when I'm working with my clients, I'm very conscious of fear as an unconscious reaction that prevents us from behaving in a way that we want to behave. That's what I'm talking about today. Fear driving the bus. And Fear is driving the bus if you are worried about what other people think. At its very core, when we worry about what other people will think if we take an action, and that fear prevents us from dealing with it, that is us judging ourselves harshly. We are using other people as a scapegoat for all of the judgments we have about ourselves. Well, people are going to think I'm too opinionated. People are going to think I'm too fat. People are going to think I'm too ugly. Whatever people are thinking, those people aren't actually thinking those things because I don't have mental powers that allow me to read people's thoughts. Those thoughts, those judgments are all coming from an internal source of me. They're a fear response. That's fear in the making. And behaving in a way where we're worried about what other people think is never going to have us shine authentically as our best selves. It's going to have us putting on a mask, preventing ourselves from being who we really are, and pretending to be what we think that part of ourselves thinks other people want. Another area where we see a lot of fear is when we hear opinion on the news, when we hear thoughts or opinions, especially from people with impressive titles or degrees, and we presume that they know what they're talking about and that there's no other side to the story. Most of the news today, unfortunately, is opinion. And there's validity in understanding other people's opinion, in hearing them share it. But rarely do we share our opinion in a way that leaves any room for anyone else to have another form of opinion. We never phrase it in the terms of, from my perspective, I see, or whatever. We say instead, this is the way things are. And people hear this and they take it seriously, and they presume that just because someone worked at Google and has a fancy title, that they know what they're talking about when it comes to artificial intelligence, for example, is a recent example of a conversation that I had. And you can see this historically in our nation all over in politics, that people were afraid of the interstate system. People were afraid of the interstate system going into place because of the death of the small town America. It was going to be the corruption of all things, this evil of freeways. And we have the freeways now. And yes, there was a lot of change that was a result of that, but it wasn't evil. But we presumed it was. We had this fear. We had this thought that it was going to kill people, that it was the destitution of people. And it wasn't. It drove business. It increased our GDP. It created capability that we didn't have before. We don't always know what the future has, but we presume the worst case scenario for it. Another area of fear is that we imagine something terrible happening. This is true anxiety. That we presume that we're going to get into a car crash, or that one that's really common for me is that my mother is going to get injured if she climbs a ladder. Please don't climb a ladder, Mom. I know you're watching this. Please have someone else climb a ladder. I have a lot of fear around that. And again, fear isn't always bad. Fear that's consistent with who we want to be. Caring individuals, for example, that don't want to see people get hurt, that is not inconsistent with who I want to be. So that kind of fear is okay. But irrational fear, like driving in downtown Portland in the middle of rush hour traffic, means I'm going to get into an accident and someone's going to die. That's a kind of irrational opinion that could get in the way of being who I want to be. So, imagining the worst case scenario, basically, and assuming that that's the likelihood and acting based off of that decision, that sole opinion. And then finally, and this is the one that I hear, this is my number one, I hear it all the time with my clients. Most of my clients have suffered from some form of perfectionism or something like that. And this is the delaying of our personal goals, our personal desires because of timing, because of worrying that it needs to be perfect because of someone else's opinion. Those kinds of delays, delaying outcomes that we want to see, is the number one source of fear. And it's the thing that I am most qualified to help people get through. I help people all the time. One of my very early clients, not my first client, but one of my very early clients, wanted to publish a blog post and had this fear of how her coworkers were going to react to it. But it was something that she really wanted to do. And we ended up pushing that button together during a coaching session. And none of those fears, the things that had been holding her back for months from doing this very simple action, none of those fears were valid. So, and again, this is going to be a short episode because fear is such a big topic, but it's also so ubiquitous. It so permeates our culture. It so permeates our minds. It's at the very center of our brain. So of course, it is connected to a lot of things that we do. There is a list of things that I can provide that will help you identify we just went through the list of things that will help you identify when fear is causing you to work against your own best interests. We're going to talk about steps to overcoming fear. Those are steps to know when fear is actually driving the bus. Here's how to get off the bus. Here's how to get off that bus that's being driven by fear. The first one is to look for opportunities to learn. Human beings learn to walk by falling over. There's no child on earth who takes their first steps and doesn't teeter or totter or toddle. That's what toddlers are, right? They toddle, they wobble, they don't have their balance set, they don't know how to consistently walk without falling over. If fear truly ran the show, no human being would ever walk because we would have been afraid of falling over. But instead, we want this thing. We want to be able to walk so badly that we're able to overlook that fear. We're able to overcome it because it's a learning opportunity and we're going to grow. In fact, there are two hormones responsible for learning. You've heard me talk about this before, but I'm gonna talk about it again. Dopamine and oxytocin. Dopamine is released when we're successful. That's not what this is about. Cortisol is released when we're not successful, when we fail. When we fall over, we get release of cortisol in our brain. And cortisol has a very specific function in our neurology. Cortisol is designed to help us learn from our mistakes. It consolidates our memory. In fact, when there was a study that was done on cortisol where they deprived human beings of experiencing cortisol, they gave them a cortisol blocker. What they learned was that those people lost their short-term memory. We have to be able to fail, and we have to be willing to fail in order to effectively learn how to succeed. And we cannot be afraid of bumping our knee, of bruising our tushy, of scraping our ankle. We have to behave in a way that's consistent with what we want to see in the mirror tomorrow. We want to see ourselves walking. We know that we're going to need to accept a few bumps and bruises here and there. And by the way, children are also designed with a tiny little center of gravity much closer to the ground than us adults. It's a lot more painful as you get older to fall over. But hopefully you can see that analogy with regards to any opportunity. If you look at the opportunity as an opportunity to learn, not an opportunity to fail, but rather an opportunity to learn, then it takes away a lot of that fear. The next one is, we've talked about worst case scenario thinking. What's the worst possible outcome that could happen? Well, most of the time we're focused on that. But what's the best possible outcome? How likely is the worst possible outcome? How likely is the best possible outcome? What is the most likely outcome? Is it worth the risk? Oftentimes, that worst possible scenario, someone's going to laugh at you. Someone's going to think less of you. I'm not going to curse, but who cares? If they think less of you because you're being authentic to who you want to be, they were not meant to be a part of your life, and their opinion is neither valid, it's neither desired, nor is it required. They were not meant to be in your life. The people who are meant to be in your life will want you to be the person that you were meant to be. Those are the people who are going to uplift you and make and help form you into the person that you want to be. Not the people that you have to change yourself for. So, what is the best possible outcome? What is the worst possible outcome? You've already thought about the worst possible outcome. What's the best possible outcome? What's the difference? In coaching, we have this this model of acceptable, infinite, and what's the medium? And we target the medium. So, what's the base acceptable possible outcome? What's the best possible outcome, and then what's in between that? Let's work on that. Let's target that. Oftentimes that's a learning experience. Oftentimes that medium experience is just the ability to learn from the situation. I know of no tool better at helping us control our unconscious thoughts. And fear is an unconscious thought. It comes from the very center of our brain. It comes from a very unconscious part of our brain. It actually turns off our consciousness when we're experiencing it. And there's no better tool to turning on your own control of your consciousness, of having a conversation with it, than journaling about your feelings, about your thoughts, about your goals, about who you want to be tomorrow. And so journaling is the third tip. We have looking for opportunities to learn is the first tip. Thinking beyond the worst possible scenario and looking at the best and most likely scenarios is the second. And the third one is journaling. The fourth one is consciousness about your decision making. And consciousness is such a hard thing to do. Let me just say, no one is conscious 100% of the times. We are, by the way, we're human sapiens. Homo sapien, right? Homo sapien. Homo sapien means that we are capable of thought. But we're actually Homo sapien sapien. We are capable of thinking about thought. So engage that tool. Engage the tool of your species. Think about your thoughts. Analyze those thoughts and be conscious of your decision making. Why are you making the decisions? And root out the fear. Being conscious of when fear is driving the bus is tip number 4 of how to get off the bus when fear is driving. Check to see who's in the driver's seat every once in a while. Save you a lot of heartache. And the final one goes back to that quote from Lao Tzu. If you're feeling depressed, that's the past. If you're feeling anxious, that's fear. That's the future. Hasn't happened yet. Living in the present is peace. So learning to live in the present, learning to find flow, learning to live based off of the facts and figures and information that's directly in front of you means making decisions that are consistent with who you want to see in the mirror. Means making decisions that are consistent with your personal values, your personal goals, and your personal desires. And if you do that, it is impossible to act in a way that is outside of who you are. Because by living in the present, by making those decisions, you are acting in a conscious way towards uplifting yourself into that person. Now, this was a short episode for the most part. 27 minutes. That's not too bad. It's a lot longer than I expected. But don't fear, because there's more of me. I'll be here next week. And I really want to thank you so much for tuning in and for being part of our show. And if I could just ask you to take a moment of your time to make sure that you're subscribed to our content, that you've clicked that little thumb button that says that you liked this video, because that helps promote this content. There are a couple of other actions you can take if you want to promote our material, and that would be to share it with a friend and to leave a comment for me personally about what inspired you about this video. Those comments thrill me, they help me, they make me feel good, and I would love to see them. Thank you. I appreciate it. And if you need to contact me for any reason for coaching services, you can visit me on my website. The information for that is in the description for this video. It's connerscoaching.com. That's ConnersCoaching.com. And tune in next week for more coaching, more positivity, and more mindset. And remember our motto, together we inspire. I'll see you then. Bye.